Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, many of you may know that I am a huge Sega fan, and I have always been a fan of Sega ever since I first got my Genesis back in the early 90s. I also had the Sega channel when I was growing up, and a lot of series that I am a fan of today are actually series that I started through the Sega channel, and one of those in particular is actually Golden Axe. But I'm not going to be talking about Golden Axe 1 or 2, I'm actually going to be talking about Golden Axe 3, which at the time I did not know was only released in America through the Sega channel. So with that being said, let's take a trip back to 1993. Golden Axe was one of Sega's most popular series in the late 80s and early 90s. This was one of many game series that I first heard about through the Sega channel, and while it would have multiple games in the series, it has not really made a comeback much like Streets of Rage did a few years ago. Okay, that's kind of a lie because Golden Axe did come back on the 360 and PS3, however it was not very good and fans choose not to talk about it. As for its 16-bit siblings though, the series started off in arcades mainly as a side-scrolling beat-em-up similar to the style of Final Fight, and some would say was even the original beat-em-up game with special abilities and a linear pathway from beginning to end while fighting enemies and defeating bosses. There was also a game on the Sega Master System that was basically a Zelda clone as Sega wanted to cash in on that game as well. The games don't hold back though. They throw anything and everything at you, which adds to the difficulty, and I vaguely remember seeing the first two titles in arcades here and there, but it wasn't until the Sega channel that I got around to playing this series. Oddly enough though, it was actually the third game in the series that I played first. Now at that time I'd had no idea, but Golden Axe was never physically released in America outside of the Sega channel for some reason. I recall hearing it's because Sega didn't think it would sell well outside of Japan, but with that little history lesson out of the way, let's dive into some gameplay and see what made this game fun. Now, as far as the gameplay goes, there's a lot of the same things from the original two Golden Axe games, such as the enemy variety and the enemy sprites and the bosses and everything. They all look basically the same as the previous two Golden Axe games, except they have a different shade of color, like maybe instead of blue, they're green, or red instead of yellow. But I did like that they brought back the mounts in this game. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, I'm referring to those little dragon allies that show up in the middle of the level that can help you out. Sometimes they'll show up with the enemies, and sometimes they'll just kind of be sitting there resting, and you can jump on them and use them to go through the level. Basically, your Yoshi of this game. And it's a lot like the Metal Slug tanks or the Contra tanks, where you can jump into one of those and use those to destroy enemies. However, in this game, they can actually kick you off of them and steal them back from you, which can suck because it turns into a game of tug-of-war, and they're knocking you off, you're knocking them off, and eventually the dragon's just like, hey, you know what, I'm out, I don't want to deal with this anymore, and they run away off the screen. Now, I will say, if you are going to have one of those mounts, it's better to hold on to one until at least the boss fight if you can. It's very hard to keep them without losing them during the levels. Now, if you can get one through to the boss fight, cool. If not, no sweat, because they do show up from time to time in between the boss fights and everything, so you can still get one. It's just a little more challenging because of the bosses trying to kill you at the same time. If you do have one during a boss fight, it does have an advantage to the bosses, and in case you're out of magic, which you likely will run out of magic if you're using it throughout the level, you will run out of magic, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. If you run out of magic, it's better to have one of these mounts with you, because then you'll be able to take on the boss until you at least lose the dragon and it runs off, and then you're kind of back to square one. You're at that vulnerable state where you're less powerful and you're kind of getting your butt kicked and handed to you left and right. But it's not that challenging of a game. You can still get through it, except I myself have never been able to beat this game, and I will talk about that in just a minute as well. But for now, I want to jump into some of the new characters that do show up in this game. As far as the playable characters go, you do get to play as 4 characters this time around instead of the 3 from the previous 2 games. However, if you're a fan of Gilius, do note that he is not playable in this game. I was a little confused by this when I first played it, because I saw him in the character select screen, but I was like, why can't I choose him? Because I do like playing as him sometimes, but he serves more as like a mentor character for your characters in the game. This time around, you get to play as a humanoid panther, a giant, as well as the classic swordsman and classic swordswoman, who I refer to as Conan the Barbarian and Red Sonja, because that's what they look like to me, honestly. Now, I never played as a giant character because I didn't really care for him too much. I always played mainly as like the panther or the swordsman and swordswoman. However, the panther is one of those characters where you really got to be close on your enemies to do any kind of damage to them. He does not have a really good ranged attack except for the dash that he has, and sometimes that can be hit or miss. Definitely try him out, but do note that if you're too close and you pull off a hit, sometimes you might get hit by the enemy in return, and it just makes it a little bit more challenging with him, I've noticed. whereas the swordsman and the swordswoman have a little more bigger ranged attack. Not too bad, but you can be a little further away from your enemies and pull off some hits. Now, if you're going to play the game, I definitely say try every character out, because you may end up liking the giant over everybody else. You may not like all the other characters. I prefer to play as certain characters because I'm easier at controlling them. I play better with them. They're easier to play as. Much like in Streets of Rage, where I usually play as Axel or Blaze, it's much easier to control them and I can pull their moves off because I'm used to them. So that's why I play as a swordsman and the swordswoman instead, because I'm used to playing as them from the other two Golden Axe games. Now, each of these characters does have their own set of magic abilities, which are pretty cool, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those for a second. Now, one thing I absolutely enjoyed in the Golden Axe games is the magic attacks, just because of how much damage they do to your enemies. Now, each game, yes, it'll start you off with one potion here and there, and it does little to no damage at all. But the more you go through each game, especially this one, the more potions you get and the higher damage you can do towards enemies. Now, this game, I feel like they added more slots and a bigger magic bar for your character, because the previous ones, I think you could carry up to 5 or 6, and this one, it's about 8. And once you get that 8th potion, it does one heck of an attack that will take up the entire screen and engulf your enemies in flames, lightning, rocks, and storms, depending on who you're playing as. I know that the Panther has the fog attack, which basically takes over the whole screen and just fog goes across the screen, almost to where you can't see anything going on. Then the Swordsman has the lightning attack, which just rains down lightning on everybody. The Swordswoman has the Flame Dragon attack, which just brings a Flame Dragon, I think, for the smaller portion, but then the bigger one is even a bigger dragon and even bigger attack. And then the giant has the boulder attack, which I believe was his attack. Like I said, I've never really played as him, so I don't know what his attack is, but I want to say it was that because I do remember seeing it in a demo that played on the game. Keep in mind that the little trolls do show up in each level, but if you miss the chance to kick them and get the potions from them, you won't get another chance until about the bonus game. And then if you miss it in the bonus game, you won't get a chance until the next level. So keep in mind that when those guys show up, really try and hit them and knock the potions out of their bag, because the more you carry, the better attack you have. And I will say that it is also better to hold on to these potions until the bosses, at least, or about the middle of the game to the end of the game. Save it for then, but only use it if you absolutely need to. If you're getting just bombarded and overpowered by enemies, that's when you can use the attack. Otherwise, I would suggest just saving it for the bosses. Now, one other cool thing that they added into this game, and this is going to be the final thing I bring up in the video, is the branching pathways. Because there were pathways that you took which would affect one part of the game, and then pathways you took which would affect another part of the game. So I'm going to dive into that and talk about what made that so awesome. When it comes to branching pathways in games, I am no stranger to those. Like I said, this was the first game that I had ever seen anything like that, where you could take one path and it would affect the game in one way, or you take another path and it would affect the game in another way. At the time, I had no idea that's what was going on. It wasn't until about Castlevania Dracula X, Castlevania Rondo of Blood, when I played those and I realized, oh hey, these games are letting me go a different way to fight different bosses here and there, which is the same thing that happens in Golden Axe 3. You fight a different boss, you fight different enemies in a different pathway, and I think about the midpoint of the game, there's one pathway you take that actually affects the character of the swordswoman, and I believe you're fighting her twin sister that has been possessed or something like that. It's been a long time, and I kind of remember that happening, or it was a doppelganger, and that's about as far in the game as I've ever gotten. So after that, I have no idea what happens, and I do plan to actually play through the game from beginning to end without getting a game over. But that is one thing that I thought was really cool that they added into this game, and it always gave me that option to go back and play the game again a different way. Like, oh, I want to take path A, oh, I want to take path B, or maybe even a path C. I think there was one spot where it splits into 3 paths and you can go 3 different ways to get through the game. And I just thought that was cool that they added that into this game and implemented it, because I know Resident Evil 2 did the same thing. And when you're playing Claire, things that happen in her story will affect what happens in Leon's story and vice versa. So that's really cool that they added that. As we come to the end of the video, I want to give my final thoughts on this game and what I think about it today. Golden Axe 3 may be a tough game, but it is not unbeatable. With enough practice and patience, you can definitely complete this game. I just didn't do that when I was younger. I didn't have the patience or the time to practice the move sets or anything. I would get a game over and I'd say, that's it, I'm going to go on to something else, play something else, go to another room, watch TV, watch a movie, go outside and play, something like that, just to get away from the game, because it was kicking my butt left and right. Now, I will say that you can find this game if you're interested on the Xbox Live Arcade. It is backwards compatible with the Xbox One and the Series X. You can also find it on multiple Sega Genesis collections on the PS4, Switch, Xbox, Steam, GOG if you have that, or GOG if you have that. It is also available on a PS3/360 collection, which is a little harder to come by these days because it was released back in 2009. But if you're looking for a physical copy in America, it is going to be a little tough because they did not release it here, and your best option is probably to import it. But I would highly recommend going for the collection over trying to import, because I believe this game is one of those ones that's kind of high in price. I could be wrong on that, but a lot of retro games these days are just skyrocketing in price, and it's ridiculous. So your best bet is probably a collection. Definitely check it out, especially if you enjoy beat 'em ups like this, or games like this, or just Sega games in general. Definitely check it out. I myself really wish Sega would bring this game back, but I don't think they have any plans to bring Golden Axe back in any form, unless they do like what they did with Streets of Rage 4 and just have another company make the game for them. But I would love to see an art style for Golden Axe in the Streets of Rage format. I almost said Castlevania, because I'd like to see that game come back too. But I would just love to see this game come back, or even in a Demon Souls type of game. Bring it back like that. That could be so awesome, but I just don't think Sega has it in their books right now to do it. I think they're more focused on Sonic and Persona and just other stuff that's not Golden Axe, basically. With that, guys, we come to the end of the video, and I'd like to ask you before we leave, what is your favorite Sega Genesis game, or Sega game in general, or your favorite beat 'em up in general? What is your favorite? Please let me know down in the comments below. I would love to talk to you about it. I would like to thank you again for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I always enjoy making these videos because it gives me a chance to revisit the past and introduce these older games to a newer audience who might be interested in trying them out for themselves. But it also gives me a chance to bring back the memories to those older fans who used to play these games back in the 90s and early 2000s, such as myself. But as always, guys, be sure to hit that thumbs up and ring that bell to be notified of when videos go live. Share with your friends and family, and I'll see you next time.